I used to believe that borders were lines drawn on maps, imaginary separations that only existed in the minds of politicians and cartographers. When I was a child, I traced them with the tip of my pencil, watching those lines twist like rivers across continents. I never imagined that one day a border would become something more than a concept, something that would cut through my life, divide my past from my future, and mark the exact place where everything I knew was forced to end. My name doesn't matter here. It has been mispronounced too many times, shortened, stretched, bent into new shapes by the tongues of strangers who never meant harm but reminded me constantly that I no longer belonged anywhere. Besides, names are delicate, and mine still carries the weight of the home I lost, the home I left behind on a morning that began like any other but ended with fire in the sky and dust covering the streets like winter ash. When I speak about that day, people expect a dramatic moment, a single event, a single explosion, a loud noise that shattered the world. But displacement doesn't begin with drama, it begins with whispers. Rumors of unrest. Stories of families leaving quietly at night. A neighbor disappearing. A friend closing their shop without explanation. A silence settling over the neighborhood that feels thicker than smoke. You learn to read these signs long before you decide to pack your life into one bag. For me, the moment of departure came when my mother placed her hand on my shoulder and said, in a voice too steady to be natural, "We have to go." She did not say why. She did not need to. We left our house with the doors unlocked, because what was the point? When the world collapses, a lock becomes a decoration. I remember stepping over the threshold, turning back one last time, and seeing my reflection in the metal frame of the empty doorway. That moment, more than the journey, more than the camps, more than the interrogation rooms, was when I understood that I was becoming someone else. We waited for hours on a stretch of road that felt like the end of the world. Children cried. Babies whimpered. Men stared at the ground. Women whispered prayers. The heat pressed down on us until even our shadows seemed exhausted. When my turn finally came, an officer flipped through my papers with the detachment of someone reviewing a catalog. He asked questions faster than I could answer. My mother stood behind me, clutching her bag so tightly the fabric tore under her fingers. When he stamped my document, the sound was both a condemnation and a salvation. We were allowed through, not because of who we were, but because of who we were fleeing from. That is the strange mercy of war, it turns victims into paperwork and suffering into statistics, but occasionally, it opens a door. Life in the camp was a study in waiting. Waiting in lines for food. Waiting in lines for water. Waiting for news. Waiting for decisions made by people who never saw our faces. Time stretched in unnatural ways. Days felt like years, and weeks passed in the blink of an eye. The camp was a temporary world built from tarpaulin and hope, and most days, it felt like the hope was thinner than the plastic walls. I remember lying awake at night, listening to the murmurs of other families through the fabric of the tents. Stories drifted through the dark, stories of lost homes, lost loved ones, lost lives. Somehow, hearing these stories made my own grief feel both heavier and more shared. We were a community built not on heritage or language or culture, but on mutual loss. And strangely, that was enough. But the camp was not the end of my journey. It was only the waiting room before the next chapter, migration. There is a difference between fleeing and migrating. Fleeing is running from something. Migrating is trying to run towards something. I did not realize this until the day I sat in a small office, answering questions for a resettlement interview. The woman behind the desk had kind eyes, but her voice was formal, detached. She asked about my education, my skills, my health, my background. Each answer felt like a piece of myself being stripped away and pinned to a page. After months of uncertainty, a letter arrived granting us the possibility to begin again in a country I had only seen in movies. It felt unreal, like winning a lottery you never entered. Other families congratulated us, though I could see envy flicker in their eyes. Their hope swallowed by another round of waiting. Leaving the camp didn't feel like freedom, it felt like betrayal. I was stepping into a world where people from my tent row would never follow. Their stories froze in place as mine continued forward. I carried their names with me, whispering them on the night before we left, as if speaking them aloud would keep them alive in some cosmic ledger. The flight to my new home was the first time in years that I found myself enclosed in a space that hummed with ordinary life, flight attendants offering drinks, passengers adjusting their seats, engines roaring with the promise of movement. Yet even then, I felt like an imposter. How do you sit calmly in a padded chair thousands of feet above the ground when your last bed was a thin mattress on a dirt floor? My new country greeted us with efficiency, a kind of structured kindness that felt both reassuring and overwhelming. Social workers met us at the airport. Translators guided us through paperwork. Volunteers donated winter coats that swallowed me whole. I smiled and thanked them, even though every gesture reminded me of my own helplessness. The first months were the hardest. I struggled with the language, stumbling over simple sentences. I nodded politely in conversations I barely understood. Supermarket aisles felt like mazes. Public transportation terrified me. Every day brought some small failure, a misunderstanding, a mispronunciation, a misplaced step. I felt like a child trapped in an adult's responsibilities. But gradually, things changed. Not overnight, not suddenly, but in slow, gentle shifts. A neighbor greeted me by name. A cashier complimented my improved pronunciation. A bus driver waited an extra second when he saw me running. Little things, tiny gestures, but they began to stitch together a sense of belonging. I found work. My mother made friends. We learned the routes of the city, the rhythm of its seasons, the shape of its customs. We started to build a life, not a replacement for the one we lost, but a new one, fragile and real. I understand now that migration is not a single journey. It is a lifetime of crossing borders, external and internal. It is learning to answer the question, "Where are you from?" with honesty and without apology. It is discovering that home is not a fixed point on a map, but a collection of memories, relationships, and choices. It is grieving what was lost while nurturing what is yet to come. Even now, years later, I still dream of my old street, the uneven pavement, the sound of neighbors chatting, the scent of my mother's jasmine flowers carried by the evening breeze. In those dreams, I walk past my house, and though it looks the same, I know I cannot enter. The door is not locked, but something deeper stands between me and the life I used to know. Yet I do not wake with sorrow. I wake with gratitude. I survived. I adapted. I learned to translate my memories into strength instead of loss. My story is only one among millions, one voice in the vast choir of displacement, but telling it allows me to reclaim the parts of myself that borders tried to erase. I am no longer only a refugee. I am no longer only a migrant. I am a person shaped by journeys, forced journeys, chosen journeys, and the journey of becoming whole again. And if there is one thing I have learned, it is this. Borders may divide nations, but they cannot contain the human spirit. We cross. We rebuild. We continue.